On a cold night in 1692, long before the chaos of the witch trials consumed, Salem villagers whispered about a single event so terrifying that even the church refused to record it, a forbidden ritual known only as the Black Mass. The story begins with a quiet unease that swept through the settlement, livestock found mutilated in perfect circles, children waking up with the same nightmare of a faceless figure lurking at the edge of the woods, and strange footprints appearing overnight in the frozen soil. The colonists were God-fearing people, but even their faith could not explain why the forest seemed to breathe, or why a shadow taller than any man would be seen just for a heartbeat before vanishing between the trees. And as these signs grew, so did the fear that something ancient had awakened, something that watched them from the darkness. Driven by desperation, a secret group of settlers, people respected in the community, not the ones later accused, came together in hopes of protecting Salem from what they believed was an unseen force closing in on them. They gathered old symbols, stolen church relics, and a book of chants that one man claimed came to him in his dreams, promising salvation. But what they performed deep in the forest that night was not salvation, it was an invitation. And the horror that followed would ripple through Salem so violently that history would remember it only as hysteria, never daring to mention the ritual that started it all. After that night in the woods, Salem began to unravel in ways no one could understand. The settlers who had participated in the ritual returned home pale, trembling, and unable to explain what they had seen, but the effects were immediate. Within hours, the first signs of the ritual's failure appeared. A heavy, unnatural fog settled over the town, even though the air was dry, and a deep humming sound like distant chanting echoed through the forests at dawn and dusk. Some claimed it was the wind. Others said it was the voice they had heard during the Black Mass calling them back, demanding completion. One of the men, Matthew Thorne, woke up screaming that something had crawled under his skin during the ritual, and his wife swore she saw his shadow move on its own, stretching along the walls like a living thing. Another member, Hannah Proctor, began to speak in a voice that wasn't hers, a slow, scraping whisper that begged for fire to cleanse the gate they opened. Meanwhile, the children of Salem grew restless, falling into fits that doctors could not explain, clawing at the air as if trying to push away something invisible hovering above them. When questioned, they all described the same figure, tall, faceless, standing just inside the tree line, watching them sleep. As fear spread, the forest itself seemed to shift. Hunters who entered the woods returned disoriented, insisting the trees had moved, closing in behind them and opening only when they ran. A group of boys found a crude altar near the ritual site, but now it was covered in fresh blackened symbols no one recognized. The ground around it was warm despite the freezing weather, and dead birds were scattered in a ring, if something had arranged them. Rumors took hold quickly, whispers that the settlers had not just summoned a spirit, but had torn open a passageway, a thin spot where whatever lurked beyond could bleed into their world. The afflicted settlers tried to hide what they had done, but the thing they had awakened seemed to follow them. Samuel Blythe, who had led the ritual, documented his descent in his journal, describing how each night the hum outside his cabin grew louder, how shadows flickered across his walls, and how he sometimes glimpsed a tall shape standing in the doorway of his dreams. He wrote that the creature did not attack outright. It fed on fear, feeding on the paranoia seeping through the town, spreading under the skin. The turning point came when one of the ritual members, Matthew Thorne, vanished. They found his clothes ripped apart in the woods, but no tracks, no blood, just a single symbol carved into a tree. Glowing faintly in the dark, panic erupted. The afflicted settlers, terrified that they would be discovered for performing the Black Mass, began accusing others of witchcraft to divert suspicion, choosing people who were weak, outsiders, or simply unlucky. But the accusations did not come from malice alone, they came from terror. Each of them claimed they saw the faceless figure near the homes of those they accused, as if the entity wanted the town to turn against itself. And it worked. Neighbors began suspecting neighbors, families tore apart, and the courts became a furnace of fear. The more Salem spiraled, the stronger the presence grew. Witnesses at the trial swore they saw shadows crawling on the ceiling, or felt cold fingers brushing their necks as they testified. Some said they heard the same humming sound they'd heard in the woods, echoing under the church floorboards during the hearings. Meanwhile, Samuel's journal revealed a terrifying realization. The creature did not want worship or offerings, it wanted chaos. The Black Mass had not been a ritual of protection, as he first believed, but a summoning, a beckoning call that allowed the faceless thing to seep into their world through their fear and guilt. His final entries grew frantic, warning that the creature appeared every night at the edge of his bed, growing clearer and closer, feeding on the terror consuming Salem. He wrote that he felt himself slipping into madness, that he heard whispers telling him the ritual was unfinished, and that if it was not completed, the entity would remain forever, bound to the land and the people. His last sentence ended abruptly. "It is in my home now. I hear it breathing behind me," and the writing trails off, drops of ink scattered across the page like splattered tears. By the time the witch trials erupted fully, the settlers who had summoned the entity were either dead, missing, or consumed by madness, and Salem's terror had become unstoppable. The creature no longer needed them. The town itself had become its feast, and long after the trials ended, locals claimed that deep in the forest on certain nights, when the fog comes without warning, you still hear that low humming, if something ancient, faceless, and unfinished is waiting for someone to finish the ritual that opened the door. In the end, the terror that consumed Salem was never about witches, it was about a darkness the townspeople unleashed themselves, a presence that thrived on their fear, guilt, and the chaos that followed. As the executions came to an end and the hysteria slowly faded, no one dared speak of the Black Mass again, burying the truth under sermons, silence, and shame. But some things cannot be buried. Travelers in modern-day Salem still report strange hums echoing through the trees, and others swear they have seen a tall, faceless figure watching from the edge of the forest before disappearing into the mist. Whether the entity ever left or has simply been waiting is a question no historian can answer. But one thing is certain, the people of 1692 didn't just fear the darkness. They invited it in, and its shadow has lingered for centuries, whispering through the woods, waiting for another soul desperate enough to finish what they began on that cursed night.